Good morning. Thank you so much for coming along to today's session. Just a bit of a warning, for some reason, GoToWebinar likes to blur my face out. I am definitely here, but I will come in and out of focus throughout the session. Today we're going to go through the CashCalc gross cash flow modeler. I'm going to focus on some of the new features that we added last year, and hopefully at the end of the session, I'm going to show you something that is coming very, very soon. Hopefully before the end of this month, we'll have survivor analysis. I've left the pop-up on the screen, so this will, when it goes live to everybody, you'll get this pop-up on the screen as well. And I have built out a quick example to show that before we go live. So the client that we're looking at today is Mary Davis. And if I click into her client record, I already have some information in the system for this client. If I go to client info in the first instance, you'll see a net worth that is populated. And if I work my way along these different tabs, you'll see all of the information that already exists within my CashCalc account. So we have her ISA, her emergency cash, a pension, a lovely property, and an income and some expenses here. Now, this information may have got into the system one of three ways. I may have built it in here by clicking add new expense and added it myself manually. I could have also invited a client to the portal and she may have actually completed this fact find. If I hop over to the fact find tab, you can see a series of different fact finds here, all dated at the time that those fact finds were saved. But equally, we do have two-way integration with many of the major back office systems. And in this particular case, Mary's record is linked to IO. So I also could have brought her records through from the back office and not typed anything. So this client information page here is almost like the source of truth within CashCalc. Appreciating within different cash flow forecasts, you may have fictitious events and pots for what if scenarios. But this page here will always update with the newest information. So we would be able to pull through a latest valuation from the back office system and then push that into a cash flow next year, for example. Now, a little bit about this client. She is in her early 60s and she's fairly confident that if she retires when the state pension kicks in, everything's going to be fine, but she'd like to explore retiring a little bit earlier than that. We're then going to look at her potentially downsizing and using some of the proceeds from that property sale to fund an earlier retirement. And within that, we'll also look at a bed and ISA situation. And then I'll show, hopefully within this story, I'll be able to show all of the new features that we added over the span of last year. A couple of housekeeping bits. We do have a couple of staff in the chat with me here. So if you do have any questions, please do just pop them in the chat. For anything that requires a bit more of a complex response, I'll be checking in on the questions periodically and can answer as we go through. But hopefully everybody's ready and we'll make a start. So I have this information in CashCalc. I can now click Update a Calculator and send it to the gross modeler. In this case, we are creating a new forecast, but if this was next year's annual review, for example, I could push the information to update an existing cash flow, should I wish. I'm also going to give the forecast a name. Beneath this, you'll be able to see all of the information that is going to push into this forecast. So we've got the actual client record itself, Mary, and then we have all of her assets, investments, and the expenditure. So I'll click Export. We now have a series of numbers next to each of the sub-tabs referencing those information points we sent through. And my advice really would be to work your way down each of these tabs. So starting in assumptions, one of the features we added last year was the ability to change this surplus income to save feature. So by default, if there are periods in a client's cash flow where they have more money coming into their current account than they have expenditure, the system will save that and you'll have a current account that is accruing. Now, I've had a chat with Mary in this case, and there isn't any accruing money in the current account every year while she's working. She is contributing to her pension, her ISA, etc., but anything outside of that, we're going to assume is not saved. For clients that do have surplus income that is being saved, you can actually choose which pot this is saved into. So if we were to save any surplus to an ISA and it was to breach that £20,000 allowance, you would get insights to tell you to address that. It would sort of flag up a warning. And if the client was putting any surplus income into a pension, it would treat it like a personal pension contribution and gross it up for tax relief. Moving down to people and timeline. We have here our events timeline. This is a feature that has always existed, but I think sometimes it can be really, really useful, and the power of it is sometimes missed. But essentially, I have retirement on my events timeline here. When I come to the client's salary in a moment and her pension contributions and ISA contributions, drawdown, I can link all of those things to this retirement event. And that means if we move the retirement event, the end age on the salary and the pension contributions, etc., will shift with the event. So it's really useful to use for clients who are toying with, well, when can I retire? When should I retire? But it's also an opportunity to put the client's goals in the forecast. So this particular client, as I mentioned, is toying with the idea of downsizing. Now, if she does that, it's probably going to be next year or the year after. So I can drop that in, and then we can add the financial implications to that downsizing event as we get to the relevant tabs. Now, as I previously mentioned, when I brought the information into CashCalc, I used an integration with a back office system and I pulled those through. I think it's always important to address the fact that any integration is only ever as good as the data you hold in that back office. For example, my ISA and emergency cash pot here that was added, I didn't have any growth rates assigned to that in the back office. So we don't have growth rates assigned in the forecast. So I'm just going to work through these and just make some edits and get them a bit more closer to reality. We have a current account that is in the system. If I edit this, one of the features we added last year is, let's go. So first of all, you can choose the actual wrapper that a client is in, and depending on which wrapper is chosen, a different set of tax rules will be applied. I want to ensure this ISA is tagged as an ISA. And then when I get to the growth rates, we have two options here. We can either input a linear return, which I will do for this particular ISA. Let's say it's 4.6%. The emergency cash, I'm also going to put a linear return, and in this case, I'll put 0.5. Now, the way CashCalc works with growth rates and inflation and such, our outputs are always in real terms. So we are assuming that money is maintaining today's buying power throughout the entirety of the forecast. The way that interacts with the growth rates is inflation is offset by the growth rate you apply. So where we had 4.6 on the ISA growth, and 2.5 on inflation, we're getting a real return of 2.1%. Here we'll be getting a negative return of 2% real each year, which is probably about right for cash. We also added some functionality around the taxation of savings pots. So in this case, I'm going to just pop in a percentage amount of 0.5 here annually, and let's say it's reinvested, and essentially the system's going to now look to the client's highest tax bracket, and it will assume the personal savings allowance and tax any interest that goes above that £500 threshold for Mary, who's a higher rate taxpayer. I also need to address her DC workplace pension. So let's click edit in here. So if ever you have a client that has inherited a pension and or for any other reason it may be tax-free, you can click that it is an inherited pension and tag it as such. With pensions in the gross cash flow modeler, we absolutely need to know if it's a fully uncrystallized pension, and if it is not, we need the uncrystallized pot value. And that's just so we give them the right amount of PCLS later on. In this case, it is fully uncrystallized. And the other option we have where growth rates are concerned is to opt for a template. Now, if I go into here, you'll notice a couple of different folders. Now, this portfolios feature, this was something that went live last year. I actually joined FE as a result of the CashCalc acquisition, so started at CashCalc before it became a part of FE. And one of the reoccurring themes and questions we had was, will CashCalc and FE Analytics integrate with each other? And it does. So there are three stages or three sections, I suppose, to that integration we have. First of all, we have the ability to send portfolios from CashCalc to Analytics. This would be via an integration. So if you are using a back office integration, the likes of IO, Xplan, Curo, you can pull in the holdings data and send that over to Analytics. You can also access some key documentation such as KID docs, advisor fact sheets, a medium scan from CashCalc, and it'll just pull that from Analytics. We also have integrated the ATRQ process. For anybody who's familiar with the investment planner in FE Analytics, we have that same ATRQ and process built into the CashCalc client portal side, and those two speak to one another as well now. And the final one, which is the one that everybody I think was asking for when we first announced the acquisition of CashCalc by FE, was the ability to push portfolio data or portfolio performance from Analytics into CashCalc. So if I click into this, these are portfolios that have been created in Analytics, and I've chosen to send through their asset allocation, and then CashCalc has used its coding to create a variable growth template based on that asset allocation template. So those are some of the options. I'm hoping I'll have time to show that integration in a bit more detail at the end of the session, but that is one thing that we went live with last year as well. In this case, however, I don't actually have Mary's portfolio that I've sent over, so I'm going to use an example benchmark. Again, data sourced from FE Analytics. I have a mixed benchmark here for a cautious investor, and this is using UT sector data. Everybody would have these cautious, balanced, adventurous benchmarks within the system. So rather than assuming an average return of just under 6%, we are assuming there is market volatility. So there will be some years of negative returns. We added the ability to input more automation around DB pensions. Now, depending on which of the statuses you choose here, the inputs will change. So if we look at an active scheme, for example, we can link it to the salary. It's going to essentially work out whether this is career average, final salary. And further down again, we have information relating to the scheme itself, and you can add in things like the commutation factor and any lump sum retiring allowances. Mari does not have a DB scheme, but let me just do in payment. In payment, you just add in what they're currently receiving, and it inputs it and treats it as an income, as a DB would be. Mari will be getting the full state pension amount, so I don't need to change anything here. I can just add that in. And another thing to mention on these 2 pages is you have a button. It's both in the pensions and in the savings and investments tab to set a pot liquidation order. So if you click into that, this order of liquidation, you can just pick them up, drag and drop, and we'll see it in action in a moment. But if we do have an instance where there is shortfall, the system will look to this liquidation order first to cover any shortfall. You can override it by adding withdrawals in, but we'll see it in action in a moment. For now, I want the ISA above everything and the emergency cash preserved as an emergency. I'm going to click into the salary now. For anyone who's historically used the net modeler, I think the salary is one of the prime areas where the gross is quite different in inputs to the net version of our cash flow forecaster. So you can add in your incomes here. Company director, will tax it as a dividend. Employed, we're going to assume a PAYE situation. But further down, you can add in details of any bonuses, benefits in kind. The main thing I want to ensure I'm doing on this page right now is linking the end age to retirement, and that is linking it to the event on the timeline that I mentioned a moment ago. Further down, a new feature, again, that went live last year, is the ability to add in pension contributions linked to the salary. So if I just scroll down a little bit, in this case, it is a DC pension that we are contributing to, and Mari is on a salary sacrifice scheme. She is putting 10% of her income into that pension, and at the very bottom, we can also add in the details of what the company contributes. And in this case, they match up to 10%, so we'll add that in as well. Now, in adding the details of the pension contributions at salary level, CashCalc has now built my pension contributions for me, so I don't have to do that. So if I hop over, we have both employee and employer contributions, and they will automatically link to wherever the salary is starting and finishing. And you can see above here as well the savings income interest. And again, I didn't build that, the system built it based on information I added when I was putting that emergency cash in. I do like to reiterate this point on any training sessions for CashCalc. I know that a lot of advisors use the terminology, the client is taking this income in retirement. Now, if the client within CashCalc, an income is very specifically money from an external source that is coming into the client's current account. So that could be a salary, a rental income, part-time work, a child benefit, things like that, external money coming into the client's current account. If your client is taking an income from any of these pots, then within CashCalc, we would need to add that as a withdrawal, not an income. Otherwise, we're sort of doubling up on the money. We're assuming it's coming coming into their current account, but it's not coming out of their pension, for example. So if we move down now to expenses, we can tag expenses as being essential, lifestyle and discretionary. We've got her total housing expenditure here, which I will keep as being essential, but these personal expenses, I'll flip them over to lifestyle, and we are assuming that they are just going to maintain throughout the entirety of the forecast. I'll skip transfers for now because we are going to come to it in a future what if scenario. And I just have one contribution to add, and this is to Mary's ISA. Contributions are tagged as either being a personal contribution or an external contribution, i.e. personal contribution, money coming out of her current account going into the pot we've chosen up here, or external contribution, money from outside of the cash flow going into one of the chosen pots. So this is a personal contribution. Client is putting £400 each month into her ISA, and realistically it's probably also going to stop when she retires, so I'll link that to retirement. I'm not going to add withdrawals at this stage just because it makes sense to see what happens before you add withdrawals, and then we'll add them in. So we'll come back to that one. And then cost and purchases, we can pop in details of any charges. I am grouping my charges together. You can separate them out. You can have your fund platform advisor fees as different entries. But in this case, I am just going to put a 1.2% per annum charge on the pension and have that running indefinitely. Another thing that is sometimes missed, just because it's hidden behind this quick add button, is we do have the option to add in annuity purchase. So if the client was to purchase an annuity, it will already find the pension. If there are multiple, you can choose which pension it relates to. And you would just need to put the amount that the client is using to purchase, either in value or percentage, and you would also need to input the annual annuity amount. And then once you add that, CashCalc essentially puts a charge on the pension and adds in the income to come in each year. So those are my inputs. I'm happy with that initially. We're going to go and have a look at the outputs now and then make some tweaks based on that. So over to cash flow model. We've got 3 graphs. The first one being the client's savings over time. So each different colour here represents a different one of her savings pots. We have her ISA, which is steadily growing while she's working and then first used to cover any shortfall. Then we have that pension above it and the emergency cash, which is getting smaller before it's being spent, i.e. it's being eroded by inflation with that 0.5% return applied to it. Something that's quite useful for if you are showing a client this live is you can hide the inputs and you can just focus on, say, one pot at a time. Quite clear to see the volatility and the growth on the pension here. The other graph we have is our money in versus money out. And what we have here is the client's expenditure, which again, index linked. So we are assuming inflation is happening. It's just happening in the background, so our lines stay flat. So we have annual expenditure of £42,000. Whilst she's working, we have that salary that was 80k gross. You can see it's been taxed and such, so we'll go into the detail on that in a moment. We have her state pension later on, and then above the state pension here, we have DMB Aberdeen ISA. So this DMB acronym is a deficit met by. So this is where we have shortfall, i.e. when the client is age 70, CashCalc has been told she is spending £42,000 and the only guaranteed income she has is the state pension. So it's looking to that pot liquidation order and finding the first pot with any money in it, and it's using that to cover the shortfall. It does that until the ISA has been used up, and then it moves on to the next pot, in this case the pension. Now where CashCalc can, if the pension is used to cover shortfall, it will do so via UFPLS. If you've specified that, you know, they've taken their tax-free cash, they've spent all their PCLS, or if you've put those details in, it will use Flexi Access instead. Now, I appreciate it might be rare that a client just spends the ISA for 10 years and then spends the pension. It's more likely they might spend both simultaneously. So to do that, you would need to add in your withdrawals. So if I hop to withdrawals, I want to specify that the client is spending a set amount from the ISA each year. She is spending £10,000 per year from the point of retiring until the end of the forecast, or as long as it's possible. And then after that ISA withdrawal, I want to assume that the pension is used to cover any shortfall in that gap. So I can now put the pension to the top of my liquidation order. And if I go back to this graph now, we have the salary, the same level of expenditure, ISA withdrawal for £10,000, state pension above that, and then an ongoing UFPLS that is continuing. But it's given her about an extra year, I think, compared to not having them taken simultaneously. But the system will also change colour when a new pot takes over. So here we're just taking the last of that ISA, and then we're spending that emergency cash at the very end. Now, a withdrawal in CashCalc works in the same way as an ATM machine withdrawal. If you go and take £100 out of the hole in the wall, you still have £100. It's not in your bank anymore, but it's in your pocket. You still have it. And that's the same in CashCalc. If a client takes £10,000 from their ISA, it doesn't automatically assume it's being spent. It puts it in the client's current account. Only if you have expenses added will it then assume it's being used for spending. Okay, so the third graph we have is our taxes. So we have national insurance, income tax, and we would also see capital gains if it was relevant in this forecast, which it will be in a moment. But the gross cash flow modeler, for me, the extra inputs and the extra detail you input whilst you're building a forecast is worth it for the detail you get in the outputs. So if I just click into a couple of years in the future, where we've got this salary, we can see the 80,000 gross. We've deducted the client's pension contributions, given us a new taxable earning. We can then see how much of that salary is landing in which of the different tax bands. So we've got our personal allowance, basic and higher rate there. And we can also see this emergency interest. We're not going anywhere near the we're not getting anywhere near the personal savings allowance there. But of course, if we were, we would see that. Insights. You will see insights when anything essentially needs to be flagged. So this is where you would see insights, for example, the MPAA being triggered, but also things like a withdrawal from an unwrapped investment, CGT might be liable, or in this year, you've gone over the allowance for ISA contributions. Those are the sort of things you would see as insights here. You can also add in, you can also see the information on a pot by pot basis and see sort of how things like inflation, growth, contributions, withdrawals are affecting specific pots in any given year. Okay, so I have built my current situation, or Mary's current situation. Appreciate that one took quite a while to go through. I went through in quite some detail. But once you have that initial forecast built, your ability to clone and create your what if scenarios will be much quicker. So I've got the current situation. There's a plus symbol just next to it. If I click into that and I create a clone of my current situation, in this case, retire next year, we now have two forecasts that are currently identical, apart from the name on the top of them. But we have two forecasts that are exactly the same. Ensuring I am in this retire next year forecast, all I need to do is move retirement. So let's move retirement. Now, if I hop to the income, that is now finishing at age 63 compared to 67 a moment ago. All of the contributions are also, or most of the contributions are also linked to this retirement event, so that they've also shifted. So if we go to the cash flow model now, taxes graph looks quite different. The savings over time graph looks very different, as well as the money in versus money out. So the client came to me wondering if they could retire earlier. Without any plans in place, it's not looking like a great idea. So we're going to continue building what if scenarios and hopefully give the client the confidence to retire sooner. So once again, we're going to clone. In this case, we're cloning the retire next year forecast. So the method I'm going to show now, it would be the same method you would use if you have a client that is receiving a lump of capital in the future, and when it comes in, it's being invested. So it works for maybe an expected inheritance payout, a life insurance payout, a sale of a business, sale of a property, those sort of instances. So how I'm going to build this is, we already have downsizing on the timeline. I'm going to go to my savings pots and add a savings pot. And when this money comes in, it'll be going into a GIA. I'll call it proceeds from house sale. The original sum invested is nothing. We don't have this money yet. And the current value on the pot is also zero. We don't have any of this money as yet. When the proceeds are released and put into this GIA, I'm expecting it to be the growth rates in line with her current attitude to risk, in this case, cautious. So I'll use that same mixed benchmark again for this pot. Add that in. I also want this GIA used before we go near that pension with any spending. So I'm going to pop that proceeds from house sale further up the list. Now at the moment, we just have a savings pot waiting for the money to come in. So to get that money into the savings pot, I'm going to go to contributions. We are contributing to the proceeds from house sale. This is not coming from the client's current account. It is an external contribution. And if anyone remembers the numbers when we went through the information on file for Mary, it was a 1.2 mil property. So let's say, you know, after taxes and buying another house, etc., and maybe spending some of it, she's hoping to release 350k. That will be a one-off, and I'm linking it to my event for downsizing. If I hop over to the cash flow model forecast, we now have a new pot that sort of jumps in a few years down the line. This is that GIA. It is the first used to cover shortfalls, so we can also now see deficit met by proceeds from house sale. We will also now have capital gains being captured. And to see the real detail, we can go into the yearly breakdown. We have a series of insights here, which is an unwrapped investment withdrawal. And if I look at the money in, ad hoc withdrawal from the proceeds from house sale pot, and we have here all the taxation as to how we've worked that out. Now, I did say I would show the bed and ISA situation. So if I hop back to my inputs and timeline, this is our transfers feature. So transfers in CashCalc, just for clarity, we're not talking about DB transfers here. We are talking about pot-to-pot transfers. So the major use cases for using this feature would be bed and ISA, bed and pension, maybe a transfer between spouses if you're doing a cash flow for a joint client. But if I add the transfer, I can select that the client is moving money from her GIA to her ISA. I'll just call this bed and ISA for the value of 20,000 per annum, which will start once she's downsized, and it will run until it can't anymore. Now, in the advanced section below here for transfers, there are two things to be aware of. One, is it tax exempt? And two, should we prioritize this transfer before any planned withdrawals? So this would be relevant. Let's say, you know, the client is spending out of that pot and you've said transfer 5% into the ISA every year. Should that be 5% of the pot value before they've spent out of it, or 5% after they've spent out of it? That's what that this top one here is for. But if we add that transfer, we should now see, if I go to cash flow model and I want to look at the savings over time chart, if I hide all and just look at the proceeds from house sale and the ISA, let's just look at the ISA, we can see the ISA getting larger with the transfer, the proceeds not having the significant growth initially. And if we look at the yearly breakdown, go to the liquid assets tab, we can see the transfer out of the GIA and the transfer in to the ISA. Now, once we're happy that we've got all of these different what if scenarios and we've got everything added in there, we can then create a report and choose to include multiple forecasts. I'll just stick with this downsizing one for now. If I add that, and essentially the report runs in a very similar way to the tabs on the left hand side, i.e. you get all your income, expenditure, savings pots, etc., and then you get your graphs and the non-expanded version of the yearly breakdown, so you get those headline numbers there. In the interest of time, I'm going to leave Mary's case here and show everyone the new feature that is coming very, very soon. So if I go to another client record, I've got Bob and Mary. If we click in here. For clarity, I had access given to me on this yesterday, so maybe not my best demo here, but it is very intuitive. If I move down to just some of the inputs that I've built, so this feature we've added in client. So no, sorry. If I go here, we've got the client's pension. The client's pension, we've got a DB scheme as well here, and state pension, for example. Now, once you've built out a forecast for a joint client here, you can add all of that detail in, and under people and timeline, when you add mortality event, it's slightly enhanced. It's actually quite very enhanced. It'll now ask you, when you add a mortality event on, is there a life insurance payout on death? If you add that in and click save, it will then ask you to review the different savings pots that exist in the cash flow relating, in this case, to Bob. And it asks you, well, who's the beneficiary? You can choose either Mary or other. And then once we've updated that, the system will build out those changes at the mortality event, which is why when I come to the pensions tab here, we have a pension that is inherited from Bob to Mary. That's her pension. That's the pension that gets flipped over. We also get an add-in for the insurance payable on death. Bearing in mind at the start of the forecast, there are no values in here. They get added at the point of the mortality event. So if I go here to the cash flow forecast, we've got Bob's pension, then the mortality event happens. Bob's pension becomes the inherited pension from Bob that now sits with Mary. And the insurance payable on death is that life insurance payout. This is a feature that will be going live very soon, hopefully before the end of this month. I wish I could give you a date. I don't know a date either. So very, very soon this will be going live. And the big tell for it going live will be, you will get this pop-up when you first log into CashCalc Survivor Analysis. And that is when it will be live. So yeah, when that does go live, please do have a go. Feel free to send in any feedback. There are quite a few questions in the chat box, so I'm going to work my way through those now. But if you can't stay, thank you so much for coming along this morning. I hope everybody has a lovely rest of their day, and the next sort of 10 minutes now is me going to be working through some questions. So yeah, thank you so much. Let's crack on with the questions. We do record the sessions, and they will be shared. There's a question around what would be the best approach to deal with the existing house for downsizing if this asset was also included in the original forecast. So there's a couple of ways you can do this. we are hopefully this year we are working towards having more property information within the cash flow forecast itself. At present, you'll notice we don't have property as an asset type when you're adding in savings and investments. Not there. When you're adding in savings and investments, we don't have properties here. Typically, we only add the liquid assets in, and then that's mainly because if a property is added in to a cash flow forecast and there's a shortfall, we might start taking money out of the property. You can get around that by locking pots. So if you did add the property into the forecaster, you can say, well, don't use that to cover any shortfall ever. It's a house. But essentially, there are a couple of ways you would do it. You could do it. You can either transfer, I suppose. You could make a transfer from the property pot to the proceeds pot, essentially signifying the liquidity, it being liquefied. There would be that option. You could also potentially add a charge against the property and then still maintain what I just showed there, do that same method of having an external contribution for the proceeds coming in. That way you'd be able to have potentially a higher charge on the property to account for a portion of the proceeds likely going to towards taxes. Yeah, I think those two are there probably are other ways. You could probably do it via withdrawals and contributions as well, actually. But I think a charge and an external contribution or a transfer from a pot that's been added to represent the property, that those are the two options I would suggest on those. There's a question around whether or not you can change the colours on the assets. So yes, you can. You can sort of change. So the money in, money out palette, we've got here these colours, but let's say we didn't. You can change the sort of shades that you want to do. So now I've changed that. My salary is a different kind of blue. So to do that, it's settings, chart settings, and then you can amend these colors here. You can also change the savings over time color scheme. The default is these green for cash pots, blue for pensions. But I appreciate if you have a client that has, a lot of cash pots, ISAs, GIAs, savings cash, all of that stuff, you may want some variation in the colors. So you can change that there. And if I go to the other graph, we're not doing that green and blue thing. So yeah, you can do that. Just to clarify, as I say, we do have two versions of our cash flow modeler. So we have a net basis and a gross basis. Now the net basis is the one that existed since CashCalc was created. The gross is the newer version. I say newer, it has now been live, I think 3 years, I think. But the gross is the one that we're adding all of this extra functionality to, the survivor analysis, for example, that'll be coming live into the gross modeler. But when you click a client, if you're getting to the cash flow by clicking create update a calculator, you can choose either to go to the net or the gross. And if you access the cash flow by clicking cash flow, you can either create a new forecast under the net here or the gross there. There was a question, can you program CashCalc to do annual GIA to ISA £20,000 transfers in the plan? I think that may have been added before, that question was added before I showed that, but just in case, yes, absolutely, that is what I did in this final forecast here. If I go to transfers, £20,000 per annum from the GIA to the ISA, and the system has built that transfer out. Yeah, so I think there's a few people in the chat that have potentially sort of missed the gross option for cash flow. So if you are not seeing any of these, it is highly likely that you've been using the net basis. So just to show what that looks like, let's just create a test here. So the net basis does have less inputs. It essentially, for clients, the outputs on both systems are realistically net. We are showing a client the net spending every year and in both, and the net income requirement, for example. But when you come to the inputs here, adding an income, for example, we don't go into that detail of working out, well, is this a dividend? Should it be taxed as dividends? Is there a pension attached to the salary that we should be doing contributions? And in amongst that as well, we'll just ask for the net amount, i.e. what does the client take home every month, and then we add that as an income. So we do still have a mixture of people using both systems, the net and the gross. Sometimes it's dependent on the client specifically. For clients that are maybe a bit more complex, have multiple income stream, multiple assets, etc., the gross, I think, even though the inputs might take a few moments longer, overall it probably is quicker because you're not having to manually calculate all the taxes, whereas for the net version you would be having to do the manual calculations. So there's a question, when inputting personal contributions, is this counted as an additional expenditure? So, I mean, technically with the maths and the code in the background, I suppose, yes, it kind of is, but it's more so treated as maybe a transfer, I guess. I.e., if you click to add in a personal contribution, I think we added one in for the ISA, for example. We did £400 a month coming from the client's current account going into her ISA while she's working. The system does sort of deduct that out of the client's income in what she receives in that current account. So if I click into here and where's that ISA? There we go. So total contributions here. So we are assuming that £4,800 in this year is contributed or is shifted from her current account into the ISA. So yeah, it kind of treats it like an expenditure, but it's a bit more like a transfer. So on the net modeler, there is limited tax automation. The net modeler will not add it, will not apply CGT if you know, a GIA is added in. It's the gross modeler you would want for that. So if the client is currently using, or if you historically have used the net modeler for a client and you want to switch over to using the gross, there are a few ways you can do that. So let's go back to the home page here. So if I click into the client record, this client, I have that integration with back office system. So if you have a back office integration, you can pull that data in and update it that way. If you don't have a back office integration set up, or you don't have a record in the back office for this client, but you do have the data sitting in the net modeler, you can click Fetch Updates, Fetch from Cashflow Modeler. It will only give you the net inputs here. So it will find you the assets, it will find you the pensions, it will find you the incomes and the expenditure. But the one caveat I will say, so when you do that and you say confirm updates, if we go to info, it'll then put that information in this page. So you then have to go and send it to the gross. So you can do that. But the one thing I would just sort of let you know to look out for, where we have incomes, they have a tag against them as being either net or gross. Now, only net incomes are compatible with the net modeler, and only gross incomes are compatible with the gross modeler. So if you pull through a net income here, it won't pull into the gross. You'll have to adjust it to make it compatible with that calculator. Bear with me, sorry, just getting to where I need to go to answer a question. So somebody has pulled me up on having a transfer linked to CPI. Absolutely, this is a human error. You absolutely can change that. My transfer going from the proceeds to the house sale to the ISA, sorry, for the bed and ISA situation, by default, everything wants to link to CPI in here. If you don't want it increasing with inflation, you can select that here. That was human error on my part. So yeah, we do update the CashCalc system when we have, you know, legislative changes. So we'll be making changes in April, and yes, when you know, when we have those quarterly budget reviews and things change, we our development resource is ready to add in those changes. Okay, I think I'm going to have to call it there. If we've not got round to your question, somebody will come back to you. So we will collate all of the questions. Thank you so much for sending so many questions in. It is really good to see that people are engaging and using the system, so thank you. And I hope everybody has a lovely rest of your day. And yeah, take care. Thank you so much.